Okay, we've made it to episode 4 of 10 Days That Unexpectedly Changed America. This one is entitled Antietam. So let's get started. Just an overview and then the details of the chapter itself. And one of the most exciting what ifs in history of the world, when a corporal by the name of Barton W. Mitchell of an Indiana regiment discovered near Frederick, Maryland, in a bulky envelope with 3 cigars in it. What he found in that envelope changed the course of the Civil War, and with it changed the course of the emancipation of slavery and the future of the American experiment. The 4th essay on Antietam explores the effects of this corporal finding General Robert E. Lee, Confederate Commander's Order 191, which allowed the Union general, the very slow-footed George McClellan, to defeat the onrushing Confederate Army at the Battle of Antietam. The overarching results of that is it discouraged Britain from entering the war on the side of the Confederacy. It deflated the Northern peace movement and, of course, led Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The Battle of Antietam took place in September of 1862. Amazing. 4 times as many Americans died on the battlefield of Antietam as were killed in the D-Day invasion of Normandy. And again, the modern nation took shape to a certain extent as a result of that battle. An overview of the chapter as we work our way through this. Again, the setting is in 1862. Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee, fresh off a couple of victories against very poor Union armies, poorly organized and poorly generaled armies, decided that he would move north into Maryland, believing that he could win, if he could win a victory on northern soil or in a border state of Maryland, that he might get the Union to sue for peace and give Confederate independence. He had decided to split his army as he moved into Maryland, sending one group off to Harper's Ferry to get needed supplies. In the process of doing that, his orders 191, which indicated that his army in fact had been divided, as I mentioned in the intro, were uncovered by a Corporal Barton Mitchell. Those plans were then delivered to Union Commander McClellan, who had the opportunity at that point to crush Robert E. Lee's army. He's still very slow in responding, but it certainly does help the Union cause. The battle that ensued was an extremely bloody battle and ended up being a stalemate tactically, but the Confederates couldn't afford the loss of so much lives of their soldiers and had to retreat south into Virginia back across the Potomac River. The book gives a fair amount of detail on the battle itself, which I won't go into all the detail there. To bottom line, a couple of things. I'll make a few more references to the battle itself as we proceed, but Union Commander McClellan could have won. He does win the battle, he did win the battle, but he could have won the war, but he keeps too many men in reserve and does not pursue Confederate Robert E. Lee of the South as he retreats back into the South. Why is this such a significant battle? It's significant for a number of different reasons, which I'll go into, but to boil it all down, the nature of what this war was being fought for changed as a result of this battle. President Abraham Lincoln had been looking for a Union victory in order to issue what was called the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in any southern states that were at war against the Union. Actually did not free any slaves. It was kind of a political move, but the major change that's being made here is at the beginning of the war, Lincoln said this war is to preserve the Union. If I can preserve the Union and free all of the slaves, I'll do it. If I can preserve the Union, not freeing any of the slaves, that's what I'll do. If I can preserve the Union, freeing some slaves and leaving some in slavery, I'll do that. It was preserving the Union. But after the Battle of Antietam, that changes. He issues the Emancipation Proclamation, changes the nature of the war. It ends any hope that this war is going to end with some sort of peace treaty with the South. They weren't going to agree to that if slavery was on the table, and the Union decided that they were going to have to totally destroy the Confederate Army, so it becomes a total war at this point. Other results of that: it hurt the Copperhead movement in the North. Copperheads were Northerners who favored the South, or at least favored giving the South their independence and ending that war. When Lincoln, as a result of Antietam, issues the Emancipation Proclamation, the Copperhead or peace movement in the North is gutted of its power and is no longer an effective force. So it has that effect. Another major result of the Battle of Antietam is that it removed all possibility of the Confederates getting British help in this war. The Confederates viewed themselves as kind of successors of those who fought in the American Revolution for freedom and liberty against what they viewed as an oppressive government. That's what we're doing. The American patriots needed French help to win the American Revolution. We need British help. Signs that they might get it before the Battle of Antietam. But when the Confederates lose at Antietam, and Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, making it a war to end slavery, Britain will not help the Confederacy on those terms because of the anti-slavery force and faction in England would not have allowed that. Britain was very anti-slavery. So it ended any hope of British assistance on the part of the Confederates. Interesting thing that the book pointed out in terms of the overall results of the Civil War, and again, the book contends that the Union would not have won the Civil War the way that they did without the key turning point battle of Antietam. But the major result, as the book summarized it, is the United States changed from a plural, the United States are a union of states, plural, to many states. It changed it to the United States is, singular. Well, what does that mean? It led to a very strong central government. This is when you begin to see the rise of the central government. The war also led, of course, to the destruction of the South and their agriculture, and laid the groundworks for the industrial dominance of the North, and the South is going to enter some desperate years of decline following that. Going back just a bit, sorry for these things being out of order, but just to touch on one thing that the chapter mentioned early on is advantages that each side had going into the Civil War. So let me comment on that in conclusion. The North, fairly simple in terms of advantages for the North. Just think numbers of people, the population was superior, industrial power, number of factories was higher, money that they had at their disposal, size of the army, etc., is going to be the advantage of the North. In some ways it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to win. The advantage that the South had at this war is they were protecting to defend their land. The war would be fought in the South. Very good generals like Robert E. Lee, and the hope of British assistance. But tying this all back together, it's going to be the Battle of Antietam, which destroys all hope of British assistance for the South or the Confederacy. So that's episode 4. More to follow in the future.